the famous postmodern philosopher Jacques Derrida. That's a fun one to say, Jacques Derrida. Anyways, Jacques Derrida, he once made the claim that Buddhists and Christians and all other religious traditions of the world, they all have it wrong whenever they say that we're supposed to love every person equally, all people equally. Here's a perfect example of what Derrida is pushing back against. One of the saints from our Christian tradition once said that if you hate some people, and some people you neither love nor hate, while others you love but only in a moderate way, and others again you greatly love, learn from this inequality that you're far from perfect charity, which supposes that you should love every person equally. Now, Derrida would claim that this saint is only misleading people here. You can't love every person equally, he would say, not because we human beings are incapable of tremendous love, but because the very idea of love itself, it requires you to elevate your beloved above every other person. I mean, think about it. Whenever we love somebody, what are we doing? What are we saying? We're saying that this particular relationship, it's special, it's unique, it's not like every other relationship that we have. And if every relationship were just as special and as unique as this particular relationship, no relationship would be special anymore. They would all be the same, right? I mean, think about it this way. If you loved everyone else as much as you love your best friend, your BFF would no longer be your BFF anymore because everyone else will have become your BFF. You will have elevated everybody else up to your best friend status. Therefore, you wouldn't have one best friend anymore. It would kind of cancel the best friend notion out, right? Look at it from a different angle. In order for someone to love their spouse, they have to love other people less than their spouse. I mean, if you loved your neighbor's spouse and your boss's spouse and your priest's spouse just as much as you loved your own spouse, yeah, you're not going to be married for very long, right? And to love your children, you have to love other people's kids less. If you loved your neighbor's kids and your boss's kids and your priest's kids just as much as you love your own kids, don't be surprised if your children come to you someday asking you to empty out your retirement funds to help them pay for their hefty therapy bills, right? It's not that I didn't love you, little Johnny. It's just that I didn't love you as much as the kid down the street. I don't see what the big deal is. It would make for some really interesting therapy sessions, right? And no offense to any of you. You all are lovely, wonderful people. But I don't love you as much as I love my wife and my children. If I did love you as much as I love them, what I have with them couldn't really be called love anymore, because the relationship that I share with them, it wouldn't be special anymore. It wouldn't be unique. Everything else would have been elevated up to its status, if that makes sense. So Derrida, he has a point, right? His line of thought, it makes a lot of sense. Love has to somehow prioritize some people over others in order for it to be love to begin with. But I also think that he's missed something really important in his critique. Something that happens when philosophers try to divorce spirituality from their philosophical reflections. And he's fallen into a bit of an either-or mentality, a dualistic way of thinking here. So let me critique Derrida's critique of religion with a personal story. If you would have met me as a teenager, you would have seen an awkward person with long hair, piercings, wearing mostly black, mostly heavy metal t-shirts standing in front of you. I was a kid who gleefully accepted the job of enforcer on my high school hockey team. And if you don't know anything about hockey, what it means was it was my job to punch people in the face hard. That was my main job. Happiness for me was a good fight, getting bloody with the hopes that you got the other guy bloodier, right? And I was always a short person, but I was scrappy, and I was a good fighter. And it was a means of releasing all of my inner rage. And I had no shortage of it as a young man. And at that time, outside of my hockey world and my heavy metal world, socially, I prided myself in being a nonconformist. You kind of have to be a nonconformist if you're a metalhead. Metalheads like to stick it to the man, give a middle finger to the man, right? To cut against the grain of culture. So if everyone was going in one direction, I was that guy that chose to go in the opposite direction just to spite everybody else. At that time, I had zero faith in humanity. I believed that most everybody sucked. I was just an angry, cynical teenager. A lot of pain, too, right? But here's the thing. The day that I fell in love with the amazing red-haired girl sitting in front of me in earth science class, the girl who would one day become my spouse, my hardened, blackened, heavy metal heart all of the sudden turned into mushy goo. I went from listening to Metallica and Mudvayne and Pantera and Marilyn Manson all of the time to listening to every love song that Journey ever wrote. And I became weirdly obsessed with Seal. You guys remember him from the 90s? Let's just say that a light hit the gloom on my gray, to quote him. And I started to come out of my shell more. I became less angry, less cynical, and more sociable, more open to the world. And yes, even though I still punched a whole bunch of people in the face during hockey games, and even though I was forced to watch the last 5 minutes of the last hockey game that I played in high school from the penalty box because I punched some kids lights out, I no longer believed that most people sucked anymore. Just the kid that I punched during that game, right? Everything changed for me. Why? Because loving this one person and being loved by them, it made me a more loving person in general. And this effect, it only quadrupled for me as I was able to hold my newborn children in my arms for the first time. Loving my children has made me a big softie. It's made me a more loving person, more open to the world. And being surrounded by loving, caring friends and a loving, caring church, it's just made me a more loving and caring person. So what's the point in all of this? The point is this. It's through specific, concrete relationships that we learn how to love universally. As Thich Nhat Hanh once said, and may light perpetual shine upon him, in the beginning of a relationship, your love may include only you and the other person. But if you practice true love, very soon that love will grow, and it will include all of us. Reminds me of something that an old hermit taught me years ago. He said that once you start to see God anywhere, you'll begin to see God everywhere. Well, the same is true of love. Once you start to see love anywhere, you begin to see it everywhere. So how can you make the greatest impact you possibly can on the world around you? How can you do your part in making the world a better place? Well, don't start off by trying to make the biggest impact that you possibly can. Don't start off by trying to make the whole world a better place. No, start off by loving a person, one person, really, really well. Start off by making their world a better place. And in doing this, your capacity for love, it will expand. And you will find yourself being groomed to love the whole world through that one person. For we Christians, we believe that the human being is a microcosm of the whole universe. The human person is a sacrament, not only of the divine, but also of the entire cosmos. So in loving one person, just one, really, really well, you already are, in a mysterious way, loving the whole universe really, really well. And if you find that your love does not expand, does not grow beyond your relationship with your beloved, you can be sure that it's not true love that you're practicing. For true love, it knows no boundaries, no limits. As Paul says, love never ends. It just keeps going. Love only knows one movement: growth. But how do we practice true love? Well, St. Paul, he tells us this morning, does he not? He tells us that genuine love is practiced in patience. Genuine love practices kindness. True love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude in its actions. It's not selfish, irritable, or resentful. Love rejoices in genuinity, in truth, not in wrongdoing. Love bears all things, it believes all things, it hopes all things, it endures all things. Most of all, love, it never runs out. It never ends. All of this can be summed up quite beautifully in something else that Thich Nhat Hanh once said. He said that love is simply being present. Love is being present. Love is being there. And this is exactly what St. Paul is getting at today. Love is about being present to the person in front of you, patient with the person in front of you, kind to the person in front of you, genuine with the person in front of you. Love can only be found, love can only be lived in this thing that we call the present moment. So if you want to love well, bring your full self to another in this present moment. Being in the moment with them, that is love. But if your body is in the moment with them, but your mind is elsewhere, you're not practicing true love, genuine love. And as St. Paul says, you've gained nothing in that moment. Or if you're talking with your beloved in the moment, engaging with them on an intellectual level, but your heart is somewhere else, it's not love that you're practicing or showing. In the moment, you're nothing more than a clanging cymbal or empty noise. Love demands nothing less than the fullness of your presence, the fullness of your mindfulness, the fullness of your heart. And if you won't sacrifice everything you are for love, it's not love that you're embodying. As one poet has said, if you won't die for love, love won't lend you its wings. So if you want to change the world, if you want to enlarge your heart to the point where you have the capacity to love every person, you must first learn what it means to give the entirety of yourself to just one person in the present moment, to be there. Love them with all that you are, and not just with certain fragments of yourself, and soon you will start to learn what it means to love the whole world, and not just fragments of it. So let's circle back to Derrida's philosophical quandary. Should you love everyone equally, or just those people who are closest to you? The answer is yes. Yes. There's no reason whatsoever to create a duality where one does not exist to begin with. As St. Paul says, there's no Jew or Gentile, slave or free. We are all one in Christ. So to love one is to love all. This same sort of question, it also applies to our relationship with God. Should you love God more than you love your family and friends? Many Christians over the centuries, and many Christians today, will answer with a resounding yes to this question, claiming that we should always put God first. But this way of seeing things, as Paul says, it's only to see reality in part. It's a childish way of viewing the world. This way of thinking, it doesn't see reality as a whole. It sees reality in a fragmented sort of way. Ooh. I mean, is God not also present in your family and friends? And don't your family and friends, don't they live and move and have their being in God? So why not just love God in them and them in God? There's no need to drive a wedge. Or to put it in Paul's words, why not love them in Christ and love Christ in them? And as Jesus says in his wisdom teaching on the greatest commandment, the love of God and the love of neighbor and the love of self, for that matter, too, it's all one movement of love. It all is encompassed under one commandment. Love has no need to discriminate. It's big enough for all. Whereas Paul says elsewhere, the entire law can be summed up in this one command, to love your neighbor as yourself. Why? Because to love your neighbor is to love God. Because your neighbor is in God, and God is in your neighbor. So if love bears all things, there's no need to pretend like it can only bear some things. Your love is big enough because God is love, and God abides in you.